Showtime! The Capital G show starts right now.
What's up YouTube, Capital G here. So we're delving into a discussion as old as the game itself, and we're trying to answer the question of what are going to be the best decks of this format on the competitive level. Now, I'm pretty sure if you've played this game for a while, you have been asked this question over and over again anytime a new ban list is released, whether it's online or if you happen to play at like local tournaments. Somebody has probably came up to you and say, hey man, what do you think the best decks are going to be? And the thing about this discussion and why people like, going into it so often is you always get a multitude of answers. Nobody ever seems to have the perfect answer, and people have various opinions on why they think what they do. So I'm going to try my best to list the best 10 decks based off potential, consistency, and how the ban list has actually affected that deck. Now, unlike my budget video, I will be taking into consideration future cards and archetypes that are going to be released within the next couple of months, because we can actually take educated guesses and estimates on how those decks will actually perform in this meta. So without further ado, this is the top 10 decks of the July 16th, 2000 format, the Yu-Gi-Oh hierarchy. Number 10, Red Eyes. Starting off this list is the flagship archetype for Clash of Rebellion that has garnered a lot of fanfare and hype for the set. What's more interesting about this deck is it's actually pretty good and much stronger than most of the Red Eye support cards in the past. The deck now offers much more viable and better boss monsters, consistent burn that doesn't make you lose any type of advantage, and finally just an easy practical way to get the big guy out on the field. Number 9, Youll Send. Always underplayed and undervalued, Youll Send remains a solid anti-meta deck with a heavy focus on floodgates and aggressive plays, still offering solid removal against extra deck monsters and good lockdown. This is one of those decks where the results aren't necessarily an accurate representation of how good the deck actually is. Number 8, Cosmos. So I actually think that this deck is going to end up being top 3 by the end of the year after seeing the deck in action a bunch of times, but I guess we'll leave it at the 8 spot for now simply because we only know of a handful of cards. That being said, those handful of cards are immensely potent, and more importantly, this deck's like the key combos in the deck take next to no resources to accomplish. That's mainly because Cosmotown's ability to return banished cards is pretty freaking incredible. I would also say that the deck's sustainability is already one of the highest in the game simply because of Cosmotown. Number 7, Mass Heroes. Well, what can I say? One card lockdown and win conditions still prevail. In a game where nearly every deck searches or uses its graveyard as a tangible resource, having one card that completely shuts all of that down is, bluntly speaking, pretty damn good. Mass Heroes don't get any competitive boost, but until newer archetypes come out and replace the old ones, Dark Law is pretty much still going to be the man, which means that this deck is still going to be pretty strong. Number 6, Tenet Knights, a deck that is apparently never ever going to sniff the ban list. S-Knights remain a very solid pick, especially considering the Necro's matchup just got less difficult. Tenet Knights are an extremely well-rounded deck with just enough good offensive plays, mainly anchored by Trevor, and enough play-breaking traps to make your opponent essentially jump through hoops to do even the most basic of plays. Number 5, Shadows. Coming in at 5th is a deck that I still can't actually believe managed to slip through the ban list completely unblemished and unscathed, despite the fact that it's been hacked to pieces in the OCG. Dolls still have their Jack of all trades boss monster at 3, and Construct being one of the best boss monsters in the game. And what I really like most about Dolls is they have the ability to mix in so many other viable mini engines, mini engines such as the Star Seraphs or the Hands, the Baby Dragon. This means that the deck has a lot of variety and it makes it kind of difficult to side against. Number 4, Ritual Beast, a deck that has been notoriously hard to learn and can be even harder to counter. I put Ritual Beast so high on the list because I kind of like its matchups against everything in the top 5 outside of Cleefort. The deck was already doing fantastic in the late stages of last formats, and personally I expect that to continue because the deck has only gotten better since its initial release in the Secret Forces. Number 3, Cleafort. Depending on what version of the deck you use could probably alter your opinion on how good the deck actually is. I think the standard build is probably the more consistent of the two, offering the same basic core strategy as something like Youll Send, but with better search engines. However, if you go the Cleafort Tower version, which is kind of like a turbo build version that is specifically catered to summon one monster, then you're looking at a win condition that's much more similar to something like Mass Heroes, except when you summon this one monster, it doesn't really need any protection. Number 2, Necros. A lot of people might be expecting this to be first, but I've got the blue deck listed as second because the facts are just the facts. I mean, arguably the best play in the deck, that being the Genlock, is obviously not a thing anymore. The deck got less consistent with one copy of Shurits, and the replacements for these cards that people are mentioning, cards like Grand Sorcerer and Burial from a Different Dimension, simply aren't as good. If they were, then people would have been running them in previous formats, but they weren't because they just simply weren't optimal. I mean, don't get me wrong, Necros are still going to be a fantastic deck. They're still going to be on the top 5, but the deck is no longer the best in my opinion. Honorable mentions include Volcanics and Clownblade, and finally number 1, Burning Abyss. So I gave the top spot to Burning Abyss because I believe that it had closed the gap significantly with Necros at the end of last format for the title of best deck. I think that Necros was still a little bit better, but I think that Burning Abyss had really nudged a lot closer than what people will give the deck credit for. Burning Abyss was already the best floating deck in the game, and it can pretty much outgrind any deck because things like Dante and Graf and Sir and Skarm, Virgil, they always pay for themselves when they hit the graveyard, but the deck's ability to potentially play these auto win lockdown cards against certain matchups, I mean, they give it a huge edge. Just being able to randomly throw in a Mass Change 2 to make Dark Law against Necros, or being able to flip over a skill drain against, you know, maybe a deck like Tenet Knights or Ritual Beast, it's pretty devastating. Burning Abyss can also make the newly unbanned Trishula. A lot of people don't realize that. I think it's going to give the deck an even more potent play when you're talking about using the tuner in the deck, Rubik. I think that with a lot of powerful traps that often can be, you know, kind of undervalued, things like Fire Lake, well, not Fire Lake, but things like Phoenix from Windblast, Regeki Break, Karma Cut, I think that this is going to give this deck an edge against pretty much every deck in the meta, and Burning Abyss are looking like a very, very great deck right now. So let me know what you guys think. Were there any decks that you think deserve to be in the top 10? If there were, leave that in the comment section below. Thank you guys for watching as always. Subscribing makes life happy.